Ready.
Georgia, do people have access to the handout? I know that may not be possible. I didn't know whether you were trying to use it or not. The PDF file that I sent you for the handout, can they get that?
You're muted, Georgia.
They will get it after the talk, after your talk.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Are we ready to begin?
I'm fine to begin.
Yes.
Okay. Δέσποινα.
Ναι. Καλησπέρα. Καλησπέρα σε όλους τους συναδέλφους. Ονομάζομαι Δέσποινα Μαυροβουνιώτη και είμαι Σύμβουλος Εκπαίδευσης Αγγλικής Γλώσσας στη ΓΑΜΑ Αθήνας. Με ιδιαίτερη χαρά σας καλωσορίζω εκ μέρους των Συμβούλων Εκπαίδευσης Αγγλικής Γλώσσας που διοργάνωσαν αυτή τη διαδικτυακή εκμορφωτική δράση με τίτλο Three Ideas that Support Educator Growth in Effective Differentiation και σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ για την ανταπόκρισή σας να παρευρεθείτε σήμερα εδώ. Πριν δώσω το λόγο στην επίσημη προσκεκλημένη ομιλήτρια Dr. Caroline Tomlinson που μας τιμά με την παρουσία της και τη διάθεσή της να μοιραστεί γνώση και εμπειρία μαζί μας. Επιτρέψτε μου να σας υπενθυμίσω ότι μπορείτε να χρησιμοποιείτε το chat στο YouTube για να διατυπώσετε κάποια ερώτηση και επίσης εκεί κατά τη διάρκεια της επιμορφωτικής δράσης θα βρείτε τη φόρμα παρακολούθησης για να την συμπληρώσετε για να πάρετε την βεβαίωσή σας αφού επικοινωνήσετε με την σύμβουλό σας. Αλλά και τη φόρμα αποτίμησης ανατροφοδότησης που σας παρακαλούμε να συμπληρώσετε. Let me switch to English now. Our dearest colleagues, esteemed Dr. Caroline Tomlinson, my name is Despina Mavrovounioti and I am the English language teaching consultant at the third region of secondary education of Athens. It's my privilege and pleasure on behalf of all the ELT consultants who organized this web event to welcome you here today. This event is entitled Three Ideas that Support Educator Growth in Effective Differentiation. We are delighted to have Dr. Caroline Tomlinson with us to shed light on differentiation pedagogy and share her expertise and practices on this special topic. I would like to add at this point that she has already got the questions you posed by means of the Google form. So now let me give the floor to my colleague Georgia Delbanidou, who is going to make a short introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Despina. Dear all, it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Mrs. Caroline Tomlinson, one of the most distinguished educators in the field of differentiation. She is William Clay Harris Junior Professor Emeritus and Chair of Educational Leadership, Foundations and Policy at the University of Virginia. Prior to joining the faculty at the Virginia University, she was a public school teacher for 21 years. During that time, she taught students in high school, preschool, and middle school, and also administered programs for struggling and advanced learners. She was Virginia's Teacher of the Year in 1974. At the University of Virginia, she was named Outstanding Professor in the Education School in 2004 and received an All-University Teaching Award in 2008. In 2022, Carol was ranked number 16 among the 200 university-based academics who are contributing most substantially to public debates about schools and schooling, and as the number 3 voice in curriculum instruction. She is the author of over 300 books, book chapters, articles, and other educational materials. Her books on differentiation are available in 15 languages. Please welcome Mrs. Carol Ann Tomlinson. Mrs. Tomlinson, thank you for being here. And let me grab the opportunity to welcome you with a warm-up question, just like we do in our classrooms. So I have read in one of your books that you characterize yourself as an accidental teacher. And I kept wondering, I saw that it comes in contrast to your professional career as a world-famous educator. And I was wondering, what can transform an accidental teacher into an inspired and inspiring teacher?
That's actually a really great question, Georgia, because I was so clear in my head that I would never be a teacher. I had no idea what I wanted to be, but I was very clear that that was not it. And the reason for that was sort of silly, but when you're a kid, you know, sometimes silly is what you do. Sometimes do that as adults too. But my mother, I had been in a school where I was happy and contented through 5th grade, and then my parents moved, and of course I had to go with them, and I thought that was the most horrible decision parents had ever made. And in the new place where we were, I was going to school in the same place that my mother was the librarian. And that resulted in, you know, everybody goes through the library, teachers saying stuff. I was so shy, I would never have done anything bad. But at night, sometimes at dinner, she would mention something that let me know somebody had mentioned me to her. And that just felt awful. And so I decided I never wanted to be a part of that again. And I got my first job as a teacher totally by accident. I had never changed my mind. I had never intended to be a teacher through college and some graduate school after that. But I ended up working as advertising manager of Duke University Press in North Carolina. It's a wonderful, prestigious university. But that particular job for me was just 100% the wrong one. And one day when I had stood it as long as I could, I looked in the newspaper for an employment ad and found that a high school pretty far away from where I was and way into the country needed a high school teacher or a teacher. I didn't really know what I was going for. And I ended up, which is a long story too, but I ended up taking that job. And it was the last day in the first marking period, so 8 weeks into the school year. And it was actually right after Halloween. I think it must have been November 1st, or maybe it was Halloween. I don't know. But when I got there, the principal was nowhere. All of this is a long, kind of interesting story, but we don't have time for it. So eventually the assistant principal came from a class he was teaching to take me to the room where I was supposed to be teaching. Didn't know what I was teaching, anything about it. And when we got to the room, he knocked on the door. And a man who looked very elderly to me then, I'm quite sure he's a lot younger than I am now, but he came to the door and the assistant principal said, "Mr. Milton, this is your replacement. You're fired." And Mr. Milton was not happy. And I was just about as traumatized as he was. And he would have left right then, but he commuted with people to school, and it was not his day to drive, so he didn't have a car. So he sat in the front of the room all day and pouted. And I told him that I had been told I could observe before I taught and that I was not prepared, so I would sit in the back. So we sat in the front and the back and watched all kinds of chaos happen in that classroom. And all day long, the only thought I could get in my head was, I don't think I want to teach. I don't think I need a job this badly. I must have said that to myself 300 times that day. I just don't need a job this badly, because it was awful in there. And I went home that night and planned some stuff that was probably, well, not probably, it was just really stupid stuff, but I didn't know what I was doing. And came back the next day. Excuse me. Hope I don't do that too often, because sometimes it happens 10 times. And now might be one of those times. I don't think I've ever sneezed online before, so something new here today. So when I went the next day to teach for the first time, I was certainly prepared, but not prepared in a really meaningful way. But somehow what hit me that day, and I think I was really lucky in that the class had been so poorly planned before I got there, that a human being in the front of the class that seemed to want to be prepared and seemed to want to talk to the students, they were high school sophomores, I think, in my first period. I taught sophomores and juniors that year. The fact that there was a person in the front of the room that seemed interested in talking to them just turned them right on. And we had a reasonably decent class as those things go. And I really think that right from that minute, and this is a great way to start, right from that minute, although I was clumsy and didn't know what I was doing and made so many mistakes that year, that idea that I could be in front of a group of young human beings and maybe make a difference to them was just immensely satisfying. And that never stopped. It never did stop through the 21 years I was in public school and never did stop the 31 years I was at the university. And still now, when I have a chance to work with people, whether they're adults or younger or older, that sense that there are ideas that you can share with people and maybe touch people's lives, and what they share with you touches yours, has been magic to me from day one. And that's why I stayed in that job that I never intended to have.
Thank you very much. And the floor is yours. We're eager to listen to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being with me today. It's a trust to have people in a country far away, a country that I think is beautiful and whose people I have loved very much when I've had a chance to be there. I hope my English is satisfactory for your understanding. I am so sorry that I don't know how to speak Greek and can't do that with you, so I appreciate your putting up with me. I think I changed the title on this slide a little bit from the introduction, but it means the same thing. What I'd like to do today is to work with you in a way that hopefully helps you extend your understanding and therefore your practice of differentiation. Georgia and some of her colleagues collected some information from you about your understanding of differentiation and also offered you the opportunity to provide some questions that we might look at today. And then she and I had a conversation about that. Many of the questions that you asked were wonderful questions. I think anytime a person asks a question, it's a great question because it matters to that person. But a lot of the questions were questions that people ask as they're just beginning to work with differentiation. And then as you start, you kind of begin trying to answer them yourself. And if you can stick with it, you ultimately do find answers. And sometimes you find those in conversations with other people. Teaching is a job that causes us to ask questions about our work forever, I think. But she and I decided to go ahead with the idea today of looking at differentiation a little more deeply and a little more broadly than people sometimes do. I find in many schools where I go that there are a tremendous number of misconceptions about what differentiation is. And so what I'm hoping to do today is to give you a little bit deeper roots into thinking about differentiation and understanding it. And Georgia tells me that there will be times in a future presentation that the group does that perhaps those initial questions can be the focus. But for today, I want us to go a little bit more deeply in thinking than sometimes we have the opportunity to do in schools. So I welcome you. I'm glad you're here. I will be talking to you a lot because the mechanism we're using today to communicate doesn't allow breakout rooms in conversations. I'm going to try to show you a few short videos as we go through the day if our technology works. And also to give you a few brain breaks every once in a while so you can just stop and say, what was that idea I wanted to write down? Or wait a minute, let me run that through my head again. So we'll try to break things up as much as we can. I have three goals today for the session. One is, again, to offer you some perspectives on differentiation that we seldom consider, again, just because we don't have the chance to, and that we apply even less, of course, because if we're not thinking about the ideas, there's no way we can use them. Second, to explore something that I call a differentiation state of mind. And that's something that we can see in ourselves and work on in ourselves. And to the degree that we're able to do that, it really does have a positive impact on teaching and learning. And then I want to share with you a concept called teaching up, which when I see it done, and see teachers working on it, it can be transformational. So those are the things that I'm hoping to do with you today, to look at those three topics and to give you a bit of a chance to talk within your own brain today, and then hopefully some colleagues when you're back at work. So I want to start by asking you some questions, which you can't answer orally for me, but you can answer them in your head. I'm going to show you some kinds of students, some characteristics of students that we sometimes have in our classes. And you might like to kind of count on your fingers how many of these categories you work with regularly, or make some little hash marks on a sheet of paper and see how many are yours. Do you have students who learn at different rates in your class? Or students who have difficulty paying attention or maybe even sitting still? Do you have any students that come from homes that are challenging for the kids, sometimes even dangerous? Do you have some kids that see themselves as just average? Any kids who need support in learning the language of the classroom at the same time they're trying to learn the content of the classroom? Do you have any students who work or could work well beyond grade level expectations? Any students who are rejected by their peers or teased or bullied? Do you have any kids that just seem to march to a different drummer? They have a different lens on life. They think about different ways. They kind of have their own special little way of making it through the world. Kids from different cultures. How about kids who talk a lot and want to answer every question, or kids who talk almost none and would love it if you never asked them anything? How about kids who have significant gaps in the foundational subjects, math and communication, language arts, reading, writing? Do you ever have any kids with emotional challenges? Students who are very independent, they would like for you to leave them alone, thank you very much, and just let them do the work. And other kids who are very dependent and would like to ask you every 3 seconds, is this right? Am I doing this the right way? Is this the right answer? Do you have any students who are very mature for their age or very immature for their age? If your answer to any of these questions is, yes, I do have some of these, I do work with them, then you know what I'm talking about when you talk about students with different learning needs who just aren't very good at fitting in a box and doing everything like everybody else does it day after day after day, or even sometimes minute after minute. If you have 5 of the categories, you're stretched. If you have 10 of the categories, you are in a place where the population is very diverse. If you have all of them or have had all of them, then you are not really at the very limits of diversity, but you have experiences with quite a bit of it. Consider this thought from John Hattie, who is an Australian educator and whose research I think is probably the most powerful of the last, and comprehensive of the last 4 decades. He says classrooms are places where variance has become the norm. There are fewer classes where all students are of the same ethnicity, achievement, socioeconomic background, and the same age that can work well with age-appropriate curriculum. Thus, differentiation needs to be the major principle in all teaching, and excellent teaching thus encompasses the key principles and practices of differentiation. In other words, if you have a lot of those students in your classroom, or even 2 categories, differentiation needs to be a way of life, because it's the way that we can reach out to and improve the prospects of all of those diverse kids in our classroom. So I want to start first with the first of the goals that I shared with you, and that's looking at what differentiation means. And I'm going to start by sharing with you a lot of short definitions, and then get to a couple that are more substantial, and end with a look at what differentiation is, or what it should be, and what it's not. I'm actually going to start with what it's not and then go to what it should be. So I want to tell you a series of experiences that I had quite a number of years ago now. This first one came from a time when I was working in Taiwan, and I saw a teacher in a workshop that I was doing that had a ring on her, a necklace on, a pendant necklace, and it had Chinese characters on it. And it was really lovely. And I said to her, what does that say? It's a beautiful piece. And she told me something, I don't remember the quote exactly, but it had to do with embracing the people around you and valuing them for what they were. And I said, wow, that's a lot like what I'm talking to you about. That's a lot like differentiation. And she said, oh no, this isn't the differentiation quote. We have another differentiation quote. And I was thinking, what do you mean, who has a differentiation quote? And so she said to me, it's a part of Chinese philosophy. And that quote says, people differ in their gifts and talents. You have to teach them. To teach them, you have to start where they are. People differ in their gifts and talents. To teach them, you have to start where they are. I thought that was pretty amazing. And she ultimately gave me the name of the man she called Joe the Jeweler. And Joe the Jeweler made a pendant for me that said this. And that was really started my thinking about the fact that I knew differentiation had existed in the United States almost since its expansion began, but hadn't really thought about the fact that it might have deep roots in other places and in the practice and wisdom in those places. And when a country has a saying, a quote, a piece of wisdom that says to teach people differ in their gifts and talents. To teach them, you have to start where they are. That's something people have recognized for a long time. I was sharing that example and the little necklace I was wearing that day with some people in another setting, and someone wrote on a napkin for me the Hebrew that you see in the middle of the slide and the transliteration of that in the top, where the Hebrew is written in English, English alphabet. And the man said, you might want to include this in your explanation as well. And I said, can you tell me what that means? And he said, yes, it's something that we learn in learning the scriptures in Hebrew, reading the holy words. And it says, educate the child according to his way. Educate the child according to his way. Ancient wisdom from a different culture. And then later, someone wrote this on another napkin for me and said, maybe you should include this one too. And this is a quotation from the Muslim scriptures. And it says, teach or talk, I've forgotten which it is, teach, I think, so that the listener can understand you. Teach so the people you're teaching can understand you. Three very different cultures, three very different ways of thinking about the meaning of life, and yet all of them have found the same thing. And that's what differentiation is asking us to do, to teach them by starting where they are, to teach them so they can hear us, to teach them according to their way. And if you look at our diverse classes now, I think John Hattie's right. I don't know how we would think we can teach one-size-fits-all stuff and do well by every child in the class that we have. So here are a few short, brief definitions of differentiation. Not terribly illuminating, but maybe give you a little twist. These are ones that I actually have used over the years in working with teachers or at the university with classes that I was teaching. They don't sound very scholarly, but they may give you a way of thinking about it that sounds more human. Differentiation looks eyeball to eyeball with the reality that kids differ. And the most effective teachers do whatever it takes to try to hook all the kids on learning. I like that one because what it says is when we look at the kids, we see the differences. And we may not have a recipe in front of us for dealing with them, but if we understand that we really can't do what we need to do for the kids without acknowledging the differences and trying to learn about them, we'll find our way. Differentiation is a way of thinking about the classroom with the goal of honoring each student's learning needs and maximizing each student's learning capacity, while also developing a solid community of learners. So what that says to me is we need to be looking at a child's needs and saying, great, I'm so glad you came just like you are. I'm happy to begin to understand what you need, and we'll do the best we can in here to make things work. Teaching the student, the individual, but also understanding that we still have to teach the class, the group, and kind of knit them into a community of learners because that's so important for everybody's learning. Differentiation is shaking up the classroom. So there are more ways for students to take in new ideas, more ways for them to make sense of the ideas they're encountering, and more ways for them to be able to show us what they've learned. That's not a bad first step. If you're saying, I don't know where to start with stuff, what can you do tomorrow or the next day that lets them have more than one way to take in information, more than just listening to you and or reading a text? Some video, some pictures, some examples, some role plays. How are different ways, podcasts, how are different ways that we can help kids encounter the ideas that matter? And what work can we give them to do that doesn't have everybody filling in a worksheet or trying to do the same one, that helps them really process the ideas? What choices can we give them? What support can we give them in different ways so that they can really try to own and understand the information better? And when it comes time for them to show us what they know, what are different ways we could suggest to them to show what they've learned? And can we open up to say, what other ways can you think of that you might show this that would be useful to you, and grow with them? Differentiation is planning for the unpredictability of a classroom. And I really think that is very important. One of my college students said, but that's not possible. You can't plan for the unpredictable. But we do all the time. That's why we buy car insurance. It's why we get shots, inoculations for potential illnesses. It's why we have a fire extinguisher in the classroom. We have so many things in our lives that we can't really predict, and we know that. So we try to prepare for them in ways that make it more manageable when something unexpected does happen. Differentiation is respectful teaching. It's teachers seeking to see kids first. The first thing I need to do is to get to know and understand my students. Needs to be first on my radar every day. It doesn't mean I don't do other things, of course, but this is number one. Who are these kids? What strengths do they bring? What needs do they bring with them? And differentiation is teaching to ensure the support necessary for every child to have equity of access to truly excellent learning opportunities, not just something, not just in a class where people teach down to them, but what would it take to have every kid have the best learning opportunities that a school can offer? We'll look at that in a little bit with Teaching Up. I think after the session today, you may have access to a PDF version of these slides. And with that in mind, I'm going to share one of the definitions on the next page, but not all of them. Don't want to overdo this. I want you to look with me at the graphic in the bottom, the boxes. One summer at an institute that we offered at the University of Virginia every summer for probably 20 years, we did a pre-assessment of the educators who were there and asked them several questions so we'd have some sense of what their understanding was and what they felt they needed for the sessions. And this particular teacher drew what you see on the screen here. And her explanation was this: before differentiation, all my teaching was in the box. I did everything pretty much alike for most of the kids. Whatever we did was contained in that box. She said, now, since I've been working with differentiation for several years, I still do some in-the-box teaching, and we all will do that sometimes. But now I know how to teach on the box, under the box, to the side of the box, between the boxes, among the boxes, And I love that in that it's a visual way for a teacher to express her understanding and a nice model for what it means to be able to say to kids, there are lots of ways you can show what you know. Let's think about some. One of my students at the university gave me this definition of differentiation, and I'm really fond of it, and I'm finding that more and more it's satisfying to me. It's very much the kind of definition of differentiation that John Hattie, the researcher I mentioned, uses in his work. She said differentiation is helping students find different paths through the same woods. In other words, we begin with the assumption that all students are going to the same really important outcomes, not 1,000 pieces of trivia, but important outcomes. And differentiation is finding different pathways, different timelines, different support systems to get them to the same basic outcomes. Those are some quick definitions. Here is my favorite one, came to me in the form that it's in from another student at the university. And he said, you know, I think differentiation is really just common sense. And when he said that to me, I thought, wow, I like you a lot already, because people think, oh, it's so complicated, too many parts, you can't do all of this. He had only been in a school as an educator for one semester, doing what we call a teaching internship, student teaching. And he said, I think differentiation requires us to think about these 5 elements that are in all classrooms. One is learning environment. And a learning environment needs to be invitational to a kid. What that means is when they're in the classroom, they feel safe, they feel like they can accomplish something, they feel like they can contribute to the class. It doesn't mean work's always easy. It shouldn't be. It doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. They will. But in the context of those things, it feels like a good place, a safe place to learn. And he said that needs to be invitational for each kid. And so it's not like in general the class is okay, but to what degree is each student experiencing an invitational environment? We'll look at some of this a little more, but just so you understand what this is saying, Adam, who was the student, said, I think creating an invitational environment for every student requires at least a teacher with a growth mindset, strong teacher-student connections and trust, and strong student-student connections and trust, and a real sense of partnership and learning community in the classroom. And then he said, I think we don't handle curriculum very well. He said, I think we don't understand anymore what curriculum really should be. And so he said, we need invitational curriculum too. We need a learning destination that seems powerful to students, that engages their imagination, that causes them to wonder, that helps them see themselves in what we're teaching and what they're learning. And he said, if the curriculum is not invitational to a student, they can sign off mentally, and we're not getting anywhere if they're bored, confused, frustrated, alienated. And he said, I think we need at least 3 things to have powerful community. One is what I call KUDs. That's just a shorthand for learning goals. What students should know, that's the K. What they should understand, that's the U. And what they should be able to do, those are skills or do's, as a result of a lesson, a day, a week, a month, a unit, a year. And what we teach, how we teach it, should really be planned to engage kids, to capture their minds and their curiosity, to make them want to stick with it because it's interesting or powerful or unique or affirming enough for them. And he said we ought to be teaching for understanding, not for memorization, so kids will put something down on a test. The brain isn't well designed for that. And to the degree that we keep covering stuff so kids will remember it and put it on a test, we're sort of at odds with how human beings are made and with good practice in the field. I understand the power of the test, but we need to keep thinking about that and pushing against it. And then he said, most importantly, we have to teach kids to understand, because they will remember and can use what they understand. If it's mostly just about remembering and repeating, that's very short-lived and it doesn't give kids any power. And then in service of his idea that differentiation is common sense, he said an interesting thing. He said, you know, I think if we care enough about the kids to want to make sure that the way the day works for them is positive, and we care enough about the curriculum to try to make it engaging and focus it on understanding, it seems like we just want to know all the time where a particular student is relative to what it is we're hoping the student will learn. In other words, it's common sense that if we're really investing in those first two things, we need formative assessment to be able to track a student's growth in what we're teaching over time and to help the student do that. And then he said something that I thought was a pretty good insight for a young man who had only been sort of teaching for one semester. He said, once you see the formative assessment results, you will almost always see that the kids are all over the place in their knowledge and understanding and skill. I might have worked hard on it. I might think it's the best job I've ever done of teaching it, but the kids are still going to be all over the place. And then he said, we only have two choices. One is to say, boy, the kids are all over the place with their understanding and misunderstanding of these K's and U's and D's. And I'm sorry, I just don't have any time to do anything about it, so I'm just going to keep teaching everybody tomorrow the way I would have. Or to say they're all over the place, and if I want to move ahead, I have to help them do something that starts where they are, as the Chinese quote goes, and helps them move what John Hattie says is +1 every day, moving forward from whatever their entry points are. And then this last one I added, I don't think the young man Adam had quite had enough experience to envision this. But if you don't have a teacher who's comfortable leading kids, helping them join him or her in creating a classroom that works for everybody, and engaging their support in creating routines that can help us have both stability and flexibility, it's hard to make those first things happen. This is my favorite definition of differentiation and has been for a while, so I don't think it's going anywhere. I found this graphic online and I really liked the idea. What it was saying to me visually was, we have 5 classroom elements: environment, curriculum, assessment, and instruction. They're there every day, whether we think of them, name them or not. They're there every day, and they're the primary classroom elements. And then we also need a teacher who can lead students and work with the students to manage routine. If we don't have that, the cogs can't really turn together. And what I liked about this was the idea that it shows that those cogs are interdependent, that if your environment is not good, what happens in instruction is not going to be so great either. If the curriculum turns students off, their assessment is not going to be showing the growth that we want. And if it turns kids off, the learning environment is not going to be invitational. As I used this with some teachers, some of them would whisper to me at a break, because teachers are polite, that picture you showed us of the cogs, it won't work. And I thought what they were saying was, this can't happen in a classroom. But what they were really saying is, this is not drawn correctly so that they could actually turn together, which was disappointing because I hadn't seen that. But later I found this. And this, to me, because I'm a geek, is a thing of beauty. What this says to me is that our aim as teachers is to take maximum advantage of learning environment, curriculum, assessment, and instruction, bound by leadership and management, so that everything works in sync in the best way we know how as a profession to lift students up, individually as well as the class. I can't tell you that I've had a perfect day like this where everything was just absolutely in sync with everything else. Oh, I don't know, maybe more than a half dozen times in 50 years. But knowing to work with this and understanding those elements and what I'm trying to work for helps me plan so much more effectively than if I'm just going in and doing stuff and not paying attention to the purpose and power of those elements. So one way of thinking about differentiation that's more complicated than the first, or more complex, more multifaceted than the first definitions I showed you, is that differentiation asks us to use all of those classroom elements: environment, curriculum, assessment, instruction, and leadership of students and management of routines in the most positive and productive ways possible that our profession knows to be good practice, in order to support each learner in maximizing his or her academic, intellectual, affective, and social capacity. Are we going to get that right for every student every day? Absolutely not. If we're thinking about this every day and working toward it and trying it every day for whatever's left of our careers, will we get much better? Absolutely. And will it make a positive difference? Absolutely, for the students and for us, I believe. So here is a bothersome image of what differentiation might mean. It's a visual thing called a concept map, which you can do for any subject you're teaching or things in your life. You choose what this concept is. In this case, it's differentiation. And then you draw a diagram that shows what its key parts are and how they work together. And ultimately, you ought to be able to read down the graphic kind of like it's a sentence or a phrase or a paragraph. So this one suggests that differentiation happens when a teacher proactively responds to a learner's need. And what I mean by that is, I think for many of us, there's a stage in differentiation where we go through and think, okay, I see, this kid doesn't understand what's happening, so I'm going to go over to his desk and help him do the next couple of steps and then leave and come back. I reacted to finding out on the spot that the kid was in trouble. Proactive differentiation says, I'm learning about these students. I'm using formative assessment to see where they are. And so each day I'm going to try to come in with things that I can do that are already ready, not responding to an emergency or an unexpected situation, but that thing of differentiation being planned for the unknown. I'm going to come in with things that I think will be useful to different students in different ways, or different kinds of support that I can give them when I'm presenting. Proactive differentiation is much more powerful than reactive. We will always have to do some reactive differentiation because that's the nature of life. But when we get to the place where Adam says that we're really working hard with the kids, it's really important to know where they are as planning goes on and as teaching goes on, so that we can come in ready with what they need. So differentiation is a teacher's proactive response to learner needs. It's shaped by our mindset. I'm sure many of you know the work that Carol Dweck has done on mindset, and we're going to look at that a little bit more in a few minutes. But a mindset that says, of course, these kids can learn much more than I think they can, and much more even than I think they can. So I'm going to build on that positive viewpoint, rather than looking at labels or past experiences or where the kid seems to be today in a way that pulls me down and pulls them down. Differentiation is shaped and guided by some general principles of differentiation. And those are the things that I was just sharing with you from Adam's definition: creating an invitational learning environment, making sure that our curriculum is of high quality, meaning focus on engagement and understanding, that we use assessment to inform our teaching, but also to inform kids' learning, and that we mentor students with assessment far more than we judge them. Going to try to use instruction that responds to student variance. And I want to be a leader of my students in creating this classroom and lead them to work with me to develop routines and guidelines that can make the class balance stability and flexibility. There are at least 4 or 5 areas that we can differentiate through. One is what we teach. That's content. Process is how the students make sense of it, what they do to really get it. Products, how they show us what they know. Affect, emotional responses to things. And learning environment. And those are the sort of venues or the elements through which we can differentiate. And we can differentiate those 4 or 5 things based on a student's readiness, their entry point into a lesson, their interests, things that they're good at, like, want to be good at, envision themselves doing, just find interesting. Learning preferences, different ways to take in information, make sense of it, show what they know. And then we do that through an endless number of instructional strategies. The box at the bottom lists some of them, but certainly not all. So many teachers that I have met have had some work with differentiation, but pretty much what they think is, if I just have some strategies, I can go do this. And unless we understand what comes before that, we're using strategies for the strategy's sake rather than really responding to kids. At some point in your work with differentiation, if you've been at this for a while or you're helping other people figure it out, this is really helpful in helping you see the big picture. If you're not quite there yet, it's just confusion, so leave it alone. Then there's one other thing I want to show you, and we'll take a brain break. I think it's kind of interesting and important to know that differentiation, like many aspects of things that we categorize and give a name to in this world, have a philosophy, a set of principles, and a set of key practices. So differentiation reflects the belief that diversity is normal and valuable. It's not an inconvenience. It's something that really enriches us as human beings when we learn how to learn from it and mold it, shape it, guide it so that it becomes positive and powerful. It believes in the power of a teacher's mindset to focus a student's mindset on growth, that it's our job to accept responsibility for a student's maximum growth, not, oh, look where this kid lives, or look where he comes from, or look how much too much she spoiled at home. Rather to say, the kids come to me with what they come to me with, and it's my opportunity, my responsibility to move on from that point, and to accept that responsibility. And also then to continue to think about through our careers, what do I do in this classroom? What do we do in this school? What do we do in our society that builds barriers to success for some students more than others? Learning's hard, and there are always places where anybody can get tripped up. But some kids hit brick walls really often because there's so many barriers to learning in their way. And differentiation suggests that people who value individuals and want to work with them have an opportunity to be a part of tearing down some of those barriers and sharing those ideas and thoughts with our colleagues. The principles are the ones that I just showed you twice now, so I won't do this too many more times, what the cogs were and what my student Adam said. And there's some key practices, proactive planning of differentiation, which I mentioned to you. Instructional strategies, those approaches and strategies that we use, not just because, oh, I found a new one yesterday, but because it responds to a particular set of student needs, and it also serves the nature and purpose of the content. Teaching up is a very important practice in differentiation. We'll look at that in a minute again, or in a while. Tasks that we give kids when we design them, if they're not all doing the same task, or even if they are, does it really respect who this kid is and dignify them? Does it honor them? Or are some kids doing tasks that look just kind of boring and rote and over and over and over, practicing the same stuff while other kids are doing pretty inventive things with what they're learning? Is there anything in this work that I'm asking students to do that's a great discouragement to them versus something that makes them say, well, that's kind of okay. I kind of think maybe I can do that if I try, or I want to learn to do that. And then flexible grouping, which I'd love to talk with you about if we had more time. We tend to group kids sometimes and frequently in schools, and schools differ as much as individual human beings do. We do a lot of grouping in schools where we say, okay, here's the best way to teach them. Put the kids who are struggling in this class and the kids who are pretty much on grade level in this class and the kids who are smart up here in this class. And we do grouping across the school. We have known through the entire length of my 50-plus year career that that is more destructive than constructive in the long run. And yet we continue to do it, not because we have any evidence that it benefits students, but because it seems more comfortable to us much of the time. Sometimes we don't do streaming or tracking or ability grouping across the school, but we do it in a class. I'm going to have math time in the elementary school, and I'm going to have one group that's not very good in math and one that's doing okay and one that's really ahead. And every time we do math groups, those same kids are going to come together. And as you probably have observed, once kids find out that they're in the low group, something bad happens to them. The growth mindset is not likely to catch hold. Sometimes once kids see themselves as being always smart, that can create a set of issues. And differentiation doesn't say never put kids together based on a current need, but it says, what about if we shook up the classroom and had kids working with several different configurations of their peers almost every day, so that they saw themselves as being part of many groups of people on a team that work together to make stuff succeed. So here's the last thing I think I'm going to share with you, and then I'll give you a brain break, which you certainly will deserve by then. Here are some things that I think differentiation is not. It is not tracking across a school or streaming. It is not not streaming or tracking within a classroom. It is not something that says, okay, just keep teaching the way you've been teaching and add on this thing called differentiation and life will be great. Differentiation is what researchers call second order change. And it really asks us to examine and think about and challenge and reconfigure much of what we do in the classroom. But it's important to know that nobody thinks we can do that the first time we try or the first week or the first month. It takes us a lifetime to become really good parents, and we don't always do that very well, not because we don't care, but because it is really hard. It takes a lifetime to become an expert chef or cook. You don't do that the first time you try to boil water. If you want to be a good singer, you keep trying to do that for the rest of your life. And working to accomplish a really effectively differentiated class is a career-long process. So it's not useful to say, I can't do this, I quit. But neither is it possible to say, I'll wait until everything is good and then I'll do it, because we don't ever learn that way. Differentiation is not mostly for students who have identified learning needs, special needs kids. It's not mostly for kids who are identified as advanced or gifted. Students in both of those groups need differentiation, but I am convinced that every student in the class needs your attention in different ways, that none of them are totally homogeneous in everything that we do. So differentiation for me really is an everybody thing. It should never be giving advanced learners more work or extra work to do. It should never be dumbing down the curriculum for students who have learning challenges. It cannot possibly be a lesson plan for every learner or a different piece of work for every learner every day. That would make no sense, even if it were possible to do, but it's not possible and it makes no sense. It isn't really a set of instructional strategies. I hope to show you today that there are ways to think about differentiation that are far more powerful than any instructional strategy. It's not that we don't need instructional strategies, but there's not one set that's the right set to use. And so that should be something that we look at. What approach might I use today? But many things that matter first and more than that. And differentiation is not incompatible with standards or learning goals or learning intentions. Somebody asked in the questions that your group submitted, how can I differentiate instruction if students are going to take the same standardized test or the same state test at the end of the school year? We differentiate because by helping students move from where they are as efficiently as they can toward what the goals are, they do much better than they just muddle through and get a little of this and a little of that. We differentiate to enable them to do better on the test than they would have without it. We do better, we differentiate to help them be a stronger fourth grade student than they would have been as a leaving third grader had we not differentiated for them. So what differentiation is, or at least should be, begins with that understanding that kids are individuals and learn individually. The idea that we can teach the class is a myth. We can't teach one thing, one pace, one support system, one set of work for kids to do with the huge amount of differences that they present to us and assume that that's going to work. Teaching the class means teaching 30 brains if you have 30 students, or 25 brains if you have 20, or 40 brains if you have 40. And those brains don't process things in the same way, at the same speed, don't have the same experiences, don't have the same support system. We have to take those differences into account. Differentiation is, from my perspective, and always should be, based on our current best understanding of research in education. We have a profession, just like doctors do, just like engineers do. And those professions grow continually. So we ought to always be looking to say, what's our best knowledge now? And where am I in trying to incorporate that into my thinking? We have research now from psychology, pedagogy, and neuroscience that feeds our understanding. We need to take great advantage of that and evolve as it evolves. Differentiation should be planning with the student in mind rather than only mostly the students. We often talk, when we talk about our classes, the students like this, the students were restless today, the students did a great job on that project, the students don't like it when we study grammar, as though they were one. And the more we use that, the students, to think about who we're teaching, the more persistent we are in teaching the class as a whole. We need to be attentive, as I said to you earlier, to each student's academic and intellectual growth, but also their emotional growth and their social development. And classes provide us the opportunity to do those things. Differentiation should be learner-centered. David Sousa, who writes about the brain and learning, says he sees differentiation as an attempt of a teacher to see the class through the eyes of a student. And I think that's a lovely way to think about it. Differentiation should be respectful of each kid. Our goal should be to dignify, to honor each learner every day as we try to extend their capacity. It's responsive teaching, responding to their cultures, their languages, their interests, their strengths, their needs, to their preferences for ways to learn, to things in their life that make them happy, so that we can understand that and incorporate that in some of what we're teaching. Differentiation is often subtle. A teacher in France a couple of summers ago, before the pandemic, so more than a couple, said to me one day, kind of sounding cross, "Is differentiation always in your face?" And I said, "Can you tell me what you mean by that?" And he said, "Well, my principal says, my head of school says, that when she comes into my classroom, she should see me differentiate at least 5 times if she's going to be there 15 minutes. And he said, I'm sure that I do some effective differentiation that she can't see." And he stopped for a minute and he said, "In fact, I try hard to make my differentiation as unobtrusive as it can be." And in that particular conversation, I would vote for him. I think much that we do in service of differentiation is invisible and should be, but that doesn't make it any less powerful. One of my favorite ways of thinking about differentiation is that it's not nearly as much a set of strategies as it is a way of being and thinking in a classroom. That way of being and thinking shapes what teachers do powerfully and can make massive differences in students, more than any particular instructional strategy can. Again, it's a means of ensuring equity of access, to really, really good learning opportunities for every student in a school or class. And once again, I want to say this to you at least this one more time. Differentiation is a skill set that we learn by studying students, systematically trying different approaches over a long period of time, taking a few minutes to reflect on what works most effectively, for whom it didn't work, why it does or doesn't work, and continuing to build on those insights. So you need a brain break, and I probably need a voice box break. So I want to give you a couple of minutes, and what I'm going to do is turn my camera off, and in 2 or 3 minutes, when you've had a few minutes to have a brain cells sort of incubate a minute, or take some notes, or jot down a question you want to know more about, or an idea you have for your class, then I'll come back on and call you back together again. So we'll do a brain break here so that you can think a little bit about what in these definitions that I've just shared with you is familiar to you, what's new to you. Are there one or two things that you heard that seem like they might be useful to you, that you'd like to kind of know more about or think about and move towards some action in? What can you do to digest a little bit what we've been looking at? And then I'll come back and invite you to join us again. If you can hear me and see me, which I hope you can.
We
let's
can.
come back. Good. let's come back and look at the second part of the session. And as usual, I'm always slow taking off, so you may see me skip a few slides in this section and the next one, and that's fine. I always have more to go on than there is time to do it. I want us to look at this notion of a differentiation state of mind for a few minutes. One of the things that I have come to strongly believe over time, which doesn't mean you have to, but is that teacher is the catalyst for almost every good thing that can happen in a classroom. And that how I'm thinking and seeing and aiming what's going on in my head is going to have a huge impact on what happens in a classroom. I'm sure all of you have had the experience of, if you've been teaching a while, going into a classroom and you're just having personally a lousy day. And if you take that lousy day in there with you, the class for the whole day becomes heavy and hard to carry. But if you can somehow leave that outside the door, you can role play, force yourself, squeeze yourself into something that's more positive, and it works better. Whole sense of our state of mind is huge. And I want us to look at what we know is probably a good state of mind to develop over time if you want to be able to attend effectively to the diverse students in your classroom. So here's what a differentiation state of mind to me is sort of like. I believe that every one of my students has the capacity to succeed with rich, complex work, not just basic skills. I believe that these kids differ in many ways that significantly impact their learning. I see it, and I'm choosing to acknowledge it. I can't teach the class as though they were one learner and assume that they can all succeed. Doesn't happen. To know their individual strengths and needs, I need to be a persistent student of my students so that every day I'm seeking to learn a little bit more about individuals in the class. If I keep at that for a week, a month, 6 months, school year, I'm in an amazingly better place than when the year began. And of course, one of the hard things of school is that just about the time you get the sense that you really grasp who they are, they leave and somebody else comes the next year. But you become better and better and better at that, being a student of your students, and it proceeds deeply and more effectively every year you keep at it. And this next one, I think, is an important state of mind. I don't know how to do these things that differentiation is asking me to do, at least not fully. I have some things I do, some that work well, but I don't really get the whole thing yet. But just like I believe my students can learn, I believe that I can. And step by step, just as I ask my students to go step by step, I'm going to keep at this until I have a sense of what I can do to know the students better and what I can do in the class to increasingly address the needs and strengths that they bring. Learner-centeredness, to me, differentiation, which is a learner-centered model, requires us to teach with an iceberg orientation. That is to say that every student, I believe that every student in this class displays only a tiny bit of what their potential is when they come to school or anywhere else, although they may show more of it in some other places. The majority of each child's possibilities lie below the surface. Really strong teachers teach to lift those hidden strengths into view. I don't want to leave them under the surface. I want to keep pulling with the kids until we get more and more of their possibilities in view. And I always want to do that with a firm conviction that so much more promise will rise above the waterline because of what we're doing, that I'm willing to invest in that process of making it happen. We're going to try a video here. That's always a little dicey when you're online, but we're going to give it a try. It's a reasonably short video, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I've forgotten exactly, about a teacher whose name is Dorina Sackman. And while the tech folks at your end get this ready to go, I want to make a couple of comments to you when you're watching it. She is a very outgoing person. She has a lot of energy and is a little bit dramatic in a classroom and seems to be a champion extrovert. I am much shyer, much less likely to be a goofball in the classroom than she is. When I see her, I see a teacher with the iceberg orientation. I see a teacher who has a differentiation state of mind, or shape. And I want you to look at her with that. I couldn't do this. I'm not that forward moving, thinking, active, crazy. You can do what she's doing in any way that matches your personality. You can accomplish what she's doing by being very quiet, by being very systematic, by being very one-on-one, by not doing quite as much joking with the kids, or even quite as much honesty as she has with them. It isn't her personality I want you to look at, but what she's trying to accomplish. What would you say I'm thinking about when I tell you I think she's a pretty good representative of a differentiation state of mind? Also, I want to give you another caveat, and that is that she is a teacher who works with English learners. Most of them are new to the school, new to the country, and new to the school she's in. And so for a year or two, when the students first come, they have at least some self-contained English language learning opportunities. And Ms. Sackman is one of those classes that they can go to. So it's also easy to look at and say, well, I could do this if I only had 10 kids in a class like she does. And my major goal was to teach them English. For some of you, that probably is your assignment. But for many of you, you're in a general classroom and you're trying to teach science at the same time, or English at the same time that you're trying to teach, the content as well as a new language and culture. Watch what she's doing and ask how you could transfer that to whatever your classroom is, because it's transferable. Maybe not looking in the same way, but some of the ideas are pretty cool. So let's see. What I need to do now is to stop sharing, and then I'll have to, stop sharing. Okay, here. This platform's new to me. So what should happen now is that the video can come up and you can watch that, and then I will reshare and rejoin you.
He read to me in English 3 times. Isn't that gorgeous? Thank you, my love. You are the reason I teach. Before we begin the lesson, I need you to talk to me for 1 moment. My name is Dorina Sackman, and I teach ESOL, which is English to Speakers of Other Languages, for 8th grade at Westridge Middle School in Orlando, Florida. What do you think?
Doctor.
Doctor. What else?
Nurse.
Nurse. What else?
A classic person.
A classic person. Well, thank you very much. As Florida Teacher of the Year, I'm actually taken out of the classroom. And teachers and schools ask me if I can come to the school and work on things that they feel they need strength. This is my school. So I want you to know that that's what this is for. Think of your future, okay? So think of your future, because you need to write when you are going to college. Understand? All right. Let's get to business. My approach to reaching these kids is never, ever giving up on them. Teaching them exactly the way I would teach anybody else, whether they spoke English or they didn't, but making sure that they have to have confidence in themselves. For you to come here 2 weeks in this school, your knowledge in Spanish, you are so intelligent.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
When I watch her teach and I take a back seat for a moment, it reminds me of some of those strategies and kind of renews some of that hope and passion that you have as an educator.
Show them, after they write it on their paper, show them how they did it, how you did it on yours. I love how you're differentiating that. Good job, Rudy. I'm following exactly what is asked of me in Common Core. and what the kids need to know to be college and career ready. But at the same time, I'm having the freedom in my own curriculum to break it down for the kids so that I can meet the needs of every single English language learner. And that's what I love about it. Bravissimo. Mwah, linda.
Muchas gracias.
Nada, linda. I speak 5 languages, and a lot of times I can use 4 of the 5 in my classroom. To answer this question, when I think about, quand je pense, cuando yo pienso. The strength of using a second language, their language, not as a crutch, but as an enforcement of knowledge and understanding for them, that's where it's really great. Es importante para buenas notas. It's important to have...
The first, to be professional.
To be a professional. Perfect answer.
Right?
Of course.
Miss Sackman is truly one of a kind. She teaches with her hair on fire every day, every period. It's constant, and her kids absolutely love it.
When I think about me or my friend wanting to participate in sports, comma. I think the uniqueness of myself in teaching is that I'm kooky, I'm crazy, I make them laugh, I make them have a good time so that they feel comfortable, but I also am in their face. I don't give up on them. I need 3 reasons in Spanish now. Go. In Spanish.
Is it
I don't know, you have to say it to me, I'm not telling you. Go ahead, read the whole thing to me right now. When they say, Missy, no, I don't speak, I can't speak it in English, I won't stop. I won't stop because I know they have it inside them. Second reason. Go, Linda, you can do it.
Second reason.
Woo! And then to see that your belief in them allows them to believe in themselves, you've just made a massive breakthrough. It's the reason you teach. What's another word for school and grades? A big word, you know.
Did you look back to your favorite pleasures or reasons?
No, education.
Education!
Is it helping you?
And you are good at, what's the other something?
Basketball.
Basketball or sports. So let's just put sports. Do you see what you just did, honey? Do you know that last year you spoke no English, and now you're the leader of this class. You're leading people in this class. Do you know how amazing that is? Do you remember you and I were like, excuse me to please, and no English. We were just speaking in Creole together. It's unbelievable how you spoke English. So now, write it.
She is one of those teachers that I can say I truly had the honor of watching her inspire children, inspire other adults, and change lives.
Can we raise the roof a little bit for that one? Because that was pretty awesome. Hello, you got it right. I call my kids at promise because I promise them to be college and career ready, and I believe in them if they promise me that they'll be college and career ready. I'm gonna miss you, baby. When you say to yourself, I teach those at promise kids, you know I love you. Thanks, baby. Every one of those at promise kids are even more promising than ever.
Linda,
mwah, mi corazón, mwah.
have a good day.
You too.
For learning,
Teaching me.
teaching me, and for your help. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your
Have a
intelligence.
good day.
You too. Bye, sweetheart. Bye.
Hey, while we're switching and the video goes away and I'm going to reshare my slides, think for just a second about what you see her do in here that seems to be positive for encouraging kids who might not otherwise be encouraged to give it all they've got in a classroom. I need somebody at the other end to give me permission to share, because right now it's telling me I don't have permission, that I can't share. Still tells me I can't share content. Well, maybe I can. Maybe it's just telling me a fib. Oh, no, that I need to go back and start again, though, because I won't get a picture here. Well, maybe I can do that, too. Sorry, I'm not familiar with this platform very much, so I am having difficulty making things happen like I need them to. Georgia, can you see this slide on the screen?
No, we can't.
Okay, then I'll have to go back out and share again. And that means that I will need to be given permission to share.
You are the presenter, so you can share.
Okay, let's see what it tells me this time. Okay. This time it's going to work for me too. How nice.
Yeah.
So here we go.
Yes.
Yeah, we got it now. Okay, so then I need to be able to do this so that I can move back to where I was. And we should be good to go again for a little bit. This slide, I think, really represents what I see in Ms. Sackman. My teacher thought I was smarter than I was, so I was. We have so many kids who don't see themselves as capable and who truly, of course, have so many life experiences and so many strengths that they bring in, because every person does. And to be an encouragement to a kid is an important part of teaching success, no matter who the student is. I don't know that I've ever taught a student who didn't benefit from honest affirmation from a teacher. And that's one of the things she does well. One summer when I was directing a summer program at the University of Virginia, I decided that I wanted to concentrate on what teachers did to engage students in their classes, and had some teachers who were really stellar teachers, and so it was easy to find examples. But there were two teachers that I found every time I was in the classroom, I was just fascinated by the level of engagement with the kids. And one of them was a teacher who's a little bit like Dorena Sackman. She would dress up in costumes. She'd show up late and have a person who'd come in who was impersonating a person in history that was going to talk to them until she could show up, but she was actually the impersonator. They went outside and sat under trees and talked with the trees about things they were trying to work on. And she was sort of Dorena Sackman in Virginia that summer. The other person and she was engaging because the ideas she taught were engaging and because she was alive with the ideas. But the other person that I chose to watch was just the opposite. She was very gentle as a person, very laid back in her style of living, quiet, almost to the point where I had difficulty hearing her sometimes. And I was fascinated by the number of times I was in her class and she would say to the kids, "I went home last night and I thought about the discussion we were having. And one question that somebody raised kept me thinking the whole night. And so what I want to ask you to do is come sit on the floor with me and let me pose that question to you. And let's see what thoughts you have that can help me and the rest of us think more deeply about this." And the kids were almost reverent. They would come sit around her on the floor. And there was something about the fact that she was a thoughtful adult asking them to help her think that was so enriching. And never did I either see one of those classes more or less engaging than the other. Two very different styles. But the outcome was one that was encouraging and caused kids to want to be there and to persist when things got difficult. So I think Ms. Sackman is very good at enlivening the classroom, which can be done in many ways. She clearly owns their success. She clearly has built links of trust with them. She clearly sees them as individuals. If you had a chance to watch it well enough, they're not all doing the same assignment right now, maybe heading toward the same way, but not the same work to get there. So I'm seeing much there that looks like a differentiation state of mind to me, and that matches many of the definitions that we looked at of differentiation. To teach for excellence is to see excellence where it does not yet exist. Then what we try to do is, once we've seen the excellence, we try to teach the learner to believe in his or her own capacity to achieve excellence. That encouragement is massively important. And then if we have a differentiation state of mind, we say, okay, I believe, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help this student believe. Now what am I going to do to show them one step at a time how to get where they need to go? Until that student has achieved excellence and found it satisfying enough to long for it forever. And that becomes who the child is. Ron Berger, who's an author and educator whose work I respect greatly, makes the comment that he thinks that once a child has achieved excellence and understands that that is within his power and belongs to him, he'll never quite be the same. And I think that's really true. So here are 3 elements that I think we have to work on in terms of developing what Carol Dweck would call a growth mindset. And that growth mindset to me is part of effective differentiation. What Dweck has written most about is one of the things that you probably saw in Ms. Sackman, and that is showing a solid belief in the capacity of a kid to succeed, believing that every kid is that iceberg and has so many untapped resources. Even if it's that girl that can hardly make herself say one word in the class, she's on that kid's side and coaching and pushing with love until she gets there. Dweck talked about that a lot, and that belief, if you just work hard, just really work hard, I believe if you work hard enough, you can get there, is really important. But Dweck found later that folks were talking only about that and not the fact that many of the kids who come to us don't know how to succeed. They don't know what the steps are. They don't know what it looks like to move in the direction of success. So for me, a second part is scaffolding the kid's success, that step at a time. What can I do now to help this student move forward? And then the third piece, and Dweck talks about this second piece, she says it's not enough to work hard. You have to work smart. And what I'm saying is you have to scaffold the kid to know how to get there. They don't have the ladders without us. And the third thing is most kids, I believe it truly is most in the schools that I'm in, don't come to us knowing what the skills of success are. They don't know that you can actually think and work your way to success, that there are certain things that people do to make them study better, or certain habits people develop that make it more likely that they will succeed. So teaching those skills of success and knowing that that's an opportunity we have too, embedded in other things kids are doing, that's really important to kids' success. So, for example, this is just one example, but look at these areas that students may not yet know to do. They may not know that successful people do these things. They may not automatically practice them themselves. Look at this for just a minute and see if there's some of these things that would be useful for you to try to teach the students to do as a part of what you're teaching them overall in their work with you. Some of the time when I was teaching in middle school, and at various points taught 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and sometimes had kids for those 3 years, and that was really amazing. But some of the stuff that I did with the kids was really demanding, and they thought it was sort of out in outer space, and they didn't always know how to get there. And so sometimes I would grade a piece that was summative, learned not to grade all the formative stuff, which is important, but I'd give them a grade on something with some notes and feedback. But one of the things that I found was that if I had a class of, let's say, 40 students, which I often did, I'd have maybe 20 of them that made a really good grade, B+, A-, A+. And I would have a few that made a B or a C or a D, but just very few, maybe 3 or 4 in that group, maybe 5 out of the class. And then I'd have another 15 or so that made an F or a D-. So it was, I got it and I didn't get it. But the kids weren't all that different in their past experiences in school. It would have been likely that some of them would have made a high grade and some others might have made a B or a C or even an occasional D, but it was like I nailed it or I have nothing here. And I used to talk with them about how they went about studying. And one of the things that I would do would be to ask one or two kids who had done really well to talk about how they went about studying for the test or working on the project, but particularly a test. And you could see the eyes of the kids who didn't do that. One of the students might say, "Oh, I knew this was coming. And so I spent 2 or 3 hours a day last weekend working on it. And then I spent an hour every night this week before the test working on it. And here are the kinds of things I checked myself on to see where I was." And you could see the kids going, "Holy cow, somebody in my class did that?" And the truth is that those kids who were doing so poorly didn't even know how to study, had no idea how to go about it, except maybe just saying, "I read the chapter." And having conversations along through the year, what are you doing that's serving you better? What are you doing differently now when you work on X? And what's your payoff? And why do you think that's happening? Made a really good conversation, ongoing conversation for kids. When I was their age in school, I was in the clueless group. Once I got to middle school, I had no idea you were even supposed to study, and didn't see myself as capable of doing anything either, so that didn't help. And I looked around at my friends that did do stuff well, and I would think, okay, that's good. They're good in that. I'm just not. And I was a poster child for a fixed or negative mindset, using Carol Dweck's terms. At points where teachers did encourage me and show me how to do better, I could see something beginning to perk up from under the level of the ocean there that we're hoping to bring the iceberg up from. Need to teach some of these things, and that's part of being a growth mindset or a differentiation mindset teacher. I think it is true, this is Hattie again, that successful differentiation has much to do with teaching kids the skills of studying, aspirational work, working together, working effectively in a group. When you see something like these two pictures happening, and it seems evident that this wasn't staged, that these kids know how to work together and that they have a plan and that they're all contributing to it and learning from it, that's so much more powerful than solo learning. And one of the reasons that flexible grouping is important, because if you can work well with a variety of groups and learn from and contribute to different groups of people, you're much, much stronger in your own self-concept and in your skills. Okay, I think we will try now another little video. This comes from a website called Educator. They have some wonderful videos and articles on education. I think one of the best sources in the US at least. And a lot of the videos are like this one we're going to show you. They call it a 60-second strategy, and the video is going to last 60 seconds. So kind of odd that we would go to all this trouble for 60 seconds. But think about that differentiation state of mind and teaching kids skills that are not necessarily the skills of how to multiply or how to change tense in a language. What are they learning here that's useful to them that will help them really develop as kids? What competencies are they getting? What confidence? And then what does this teacher have to do with the differentiation state of mind? Why do you suppose she's doing this thing with them? What does that suggest that's in her thinking that she sees as her opportunity or responsibility when they're working? So I will stop sharing here if I can find the okay, somebody stopped it for me. That's good. So this one's, you're going to have to look fast because this one only lasts 60 seconds. Might need to start this over. I can't hear the sound, folks. Georgia, I don't know if you can hear the sound.
No, we can't hear the sound.
Yes. Start it over again. It just doesn't take that long to redo it.
Fortunately, there were subs.
Does it make sense to try playing that again to get the sound to go with it?
Maybe I can try to show it. Let me try.
You're here. Do you want me to give it a try?
Yes, please, Pasha, if you have it ready.
Yes.
Okay.
Using your desk as a whiteboard, answer questions, and then we'll start the rotations. The respond, reflect, review protocol is an active engagement activity where students evaluate each other's work. The first part of it, students respond to a given question or prompt. When the timer dings, be ready to rotate. They rotate in order to reflect on what was written and leave a piece of feedback. How can your partner strengthen their response? Rotation 2. And then they rotate to a different desk and leave a positive affirmation or praise. Once they return to their desk, they're able to review and share.
Nevin said, I like your evidence. It really supports your answer.
It really helps students understand what makes a good response and ways to improve their own learning.
Okay, let me see if I can share here again. It's telling me still that I can't. I don't know quite what that is, but I'm going to have to get rid of this anyhow.
Try to share again.
Okay. I think I have to probably just take this off completely and try sharing again. Let me try that. Share. Got it. Or not. Gonna have to go open the slide here, but that's okay. I can do that. Or I think I can. So here oh, wait a minute. Can you see this okay?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well, that's not helpful then. So it's on the desktop and I will come back and
press share.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, share right there.
Yes. Now you're starting to share. Yes.
Now, can you see it?
We can see your desktop. So you have to enlarge.
Yeah, oh yeah, I can enlarge it. I just didn't know whether you could see it. Can you see it now?
Yes, fine.
Okay.
Everything fine.
Perfect. Okay, got it. Sorry, guys, about this jerkiness, but it's best I know how to do here right now. I think what this is a very short piece, but I don't think it ever occurred to me to read another student's work when I was a student and ask myself, what is this student doing that's similar to what I'm doing or different? And what can I learn from this? And how can I do better than saying, nice job, or you did well here, to help the student know what's really strong and a positive next step they can take. The kids learn to trust each other through that. And then that builds partnerships as trust ongoing all year, that my colleagues, my peers are here to help me succeed, and I'm here to help them succeed. And it's so amazing when kids feel like they're not alone in learning and when they have the skills to actually help one another and to help themselves. So I think this is a small example of a teacher who is showing kids not just perhaps that she has a belief in them. And by the way, when she gets them up and walking and trusts them to be able to give this kind of feedback in an orderly, meaningful way, she does trust them. She's built that trust and she's built the skills they have that they need to have to be able to do that. So building community matters. These kids in this man's second grade class are sitting on the floor, really often working together, sometimes in groups of 2 or 3 or 4, sometimes one group turns to another, sometimes the student's working alone, sometimes some kids are still sitting at desks, but always there's this interchange between the students that deals so much to build kids' competence and confidence and sense of belonging and contribution. Really, really powerful. It's a group of kids who, many of whom come from low-income homes, many of whom don't really have the kind of support that we wish every kid had, but in this classroom, they learn to learn together. And that is empowering to them. It is also a huge help to the teacher once they have learned how to do this and answer one another's questions and support one another in their progress. I love this quote, and I think we end this section here maybe, but nobody succeeds beyond his or her wildest expectations unless she begins with some wild expectations. And that's a pretty good segue. Oh no, this is really important. I want to show you this before we go on to the next part. I debated with where to put this in the presentation. I want you to think about the possibility that there are 3 dimensions to differentiation. And the word differentiation doesn't mean anything. It's how we interpret it and what we do with it. But 3 dimensions to being effective in paying attention to kids, creating a classroom that's more learner-centered, doing things that help kids see the possibilities above the surface and also begin to explore and lift the lower part of the potential. And I'm showing you these because I think we sometimes limit differentiation to just one of these dimensions. Foreground differentiation to me is something that a teacher is doing in a classroom to attend to kids' varied needs so that they're not all doing the same thing in the same way at the same time right now. It's what that head of school was looking for when she said to the teacher, I need to be able to see you differentiate 5 times while I'm in here, if I'm in here 15 minutes. It can be a strategy that I use with kids, an particular instructional strategy, and the kids and the teacher see that it's not the same for everybody. It can be a process that kids follow, and they're not necessarily all doing the process in the same way. For example, in the room that I just showed you with the 2nd graders, they're all working on something, but they're not necessarily processing it all in the same way. And you can tell that by the variety of materials they have and the variety of groups. It might be the teacher talking with kids about differentiation. It might be the way that you're modeling something for kids. In other words, empathy for something, but talking to them about it and they're understanding why it's important to share that with themselves, with their friends. In other words, foreground stuff is what we tend to think of as differentiation. It's stuff that looks different in the classroom. It's different books, different timetables, conversations about how we differ as learners and how we can do a better job of meeting those needs. Should always be respectful, should always dignify the learner. But the deal with the foreground stuff, it's attending to student differences in a way that is visible to parents, to teachers, to principals, to me as the teacher. Second column is huge. I think of it as background differentiation. As I suggested to you earlier, if you have really powerful curriculum, if you have figured out how to help kids connect it to their lives, if you've designed it so they're going to be exploring things that they're interested in relative to that curriculum, that is just so helpful to everybody. It isn't differentiation because you're not doing different things with different kids. It's that you've created something intriguing enough, useful enough, relevant enough so that it makes everybody be better. If you're using formative assessment in successful ways to see where kids are in relation to a learning trajectory, you might say to kids, here's what you need to be trying to show. Here's an understanding that you need to illustrate. Or here's a way that you need to show that you are proficient with these words. Here's something I created that you might use to show that, but you could also draw a diagram and show it. Or you could tell a story about something and do it symbolically. That shows some differentiation because kids had choices. But formative assessment is formative assessment. And if you use it well, that's going to lift everybody up. It's not differentiation until you figure out how you're going to use it. And then once you figure out how to use it in different ways, then it becomes foreground differentiation. But do you have classroom routines, processes, structures, how we think about things, how I think about teaching and learning, systems that contribute to student success for everybody? An invitational environment is a background thing. You don't talk about it all the time. It's something you lead kids to make decisions on, and you model for them, and you study yourself and make adjustments, but it's not differentiation per se. It's a background thing that makes a difference. And then the third dimension of differentiation, which I've mentioned to you a couple of times now, is what I think of as underground differentiation. I don't mean underground in the sense that we sometimes think of, that it's a subversive sort of thing, or, it's hidden because it's wrong. I'm seeing an underground thing as a structure, like a subway system that runs underneath a city, or electrical wiring that's underneath a house that illuminates it. Underground differentiation to me is stuff that comes into the classroom with you and with me. Am I sensitive to my tone of voice, and sensitive to trying to use that tone of voice in a way that's calming or reassuring or thoughtful? Am I sensitive to the fact that I may have some students in the class who need me to go at a slower pace than I might normally go, and at key points I really try to attend to that? Do I truly have a Dorina Sackman growth mindset so that kids hear me and see me believing in them and following through on what's necessary to help them succeed? Do I show high expectations for all of them? Are they really clear that everybody's working to do mighty work? Am I empathetic with them? Do I have a positive sense of humor? Am I a collaborator with them instead of the dictator of the class? Can they see me being present in the class when I'm with you? When I'm in this room with you, I'm yours. I had some surgery 4 or 5 years ago now, and the anesthesiologist came in to where I was before the surgery. And he said to me, asked me a lot of questions, checked some stuff, but he said, I want to say one thing to you as I leave. When you're in that operating room today, you're the only thing I'm there for. I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm not watching anything else. I'm not listening to anything else. All I'm doing is watching you and the equipment that helps me know how you're doing. And I will be there for anything you need while you're asleep. And I thought, wow, I mean, as far as I know, he could have gone in there and eaten a sandwich. I don't know what he actually did, but that was hugely reassuring at that point. The kids need to have this sense, I'm here for you. What you're doing is what makes me tick right now. I'm yours. Those kinds of things. I'm organized, and so we don't have to muddle around trying to figure out how to make this work. We've got a plan. Evident engagement with kids that I'm fascinated by what they're saying, and I'm listening and asking questions because I care about what they're saying. As I said to you earlier today, I think we have lots of impressions of what differentiation is that are not robust enough. And when that happens, I think we're sometimes just looking at that different thing I do in the classroom that would be in foreground column, as opposed to what routines are really helping me and which ones are missing, and what it is that I bring to the success of the class every day. So if you, this afternoon or this evening later, when you get the handout, this isn't the same slide. Actually, it's or maybe it is. Yeah, this is an illumination of the other one. It breaks out a little bit what these things mean, how they show up in a classroom. So let's take another brain break here and think just for a couple of minutes, and I'll do the same thing. I'll come back to you in 3 minutes probably. Where is your brain in terms of a differentiation mindset, a differentiation state of mind? What do you already do that makes success happen in the classroom much more than if you didn't do it? What have you seen in some of your colleagues that make things happen in the classroom and you think, wow, why didn't that happen with me? My first year of teaching, as I told you, started in a very strange way, and I just didn't know what I was doing. I was teaching next door to a woman named Ms. Gardner, and it was her last year of teaching while it was my first year. The school was a very troubled place. It was the first year of mandated racial integration in the Deep South. Everything was tense. The school didn't have very much of a framework of discipline or high expectations. Everything was sort of a hot mess generally. And I watched kids in her class. They were high school seniors. And whatever she asked them to do, they were into. It really mattered to them somehow. And I couldn't figure it out. They were almost reverent to her because that place was meaning so much to them. And she would come into my room every once in a while in the afternoon and just chat, I'm sure because she knew I needed help. And often when she was in there, she would say one thing that I didn't understand, but I did understand that it was important and I needed to think about it. And I can remember one day in particular, she said, it wasn't referring to anything we talked about. She was kind of looking out of the window and she said, you know, I think I have had a good day in school when every one of my students has a personal Ms. Gardner story to share at home that night. And I can remember standing there thinking, I have 150 students. How do I give 150 students a personal Ms. Tomlinson story to tell, for heaven's sakes? What I learned, of course, is that if the class has something funny that happens in it that's positive, they'll all go home and tell it. It's their story. If I said one thing to them that really encourages them, they'll say that. If it felt great that they could say at the end of the class period, our group worked really well together, they'll go home and share that. And I think it is true that if they have had a positive experience in a class and can go home and tell about it, that tells me that something is happening in that third column for sure, and maybe some of the others. So think about what it is in your work that reflects a differentiation state of mind, what else you might like to learn, and I will come back to you in just a couple of minutes and we'll look at the last section that we have together. Okay, I'm going to ask you to come back and join me again if you can. And I just looked at my watch and suddenly decided the watch must be broken, but of course it's not. Time has gone and I have not been aware of its going so much. So I want to share with you for just a second what this idea of teaching up means, and then I'll need to sign off with you and we can maybe come back and talk about this a little bit later, or maybe you'll have a chance to read about it some. I'd be glad to send Georgia an article or two on this if some of you would like to look at it. And I don't know how to get rid of this annoying box on my screen. And since we don't have much time, I've tried what I know to do. And so I'm just not going to worry about it too much right now. A neuroscientist at the university where I was teaching was asked what she would like people to know most about neuroscience that would be most helpful in their parenting, in their teaching, in their jobs. What do you know about learning from neuroscience that we all should know? And her answer was that we need to understand that we're not born with certain capacities and abilities, that our brain is incredibly malleable, and that we're capable of learning so many things. Our whole brain works together to help things learn. And it really is your environment and your intent that enables that iceberg thing to come up. And so what she would like people most to know is that our brains are very plastic and that we can learn almost anything that we set our mind to, and that we have a support system to help us achieve. And teaching up kind of comes from that. You see if I can find one thing here to share with you kind of quickly. And so teaching up is essentially this. It's that we start our planning with trying to create experiences from the curriculum guides, from the standards, from the learning intentions we're given that would challenge and stretch advanced learners. What's something I could do with this that kids who really already know stuff would be interested in, that they would find it exciting, exhilarating for them to do? And then figure out ways that we can scaffold that curriculum so that other kids can have access to it. It doesn't mean everybody's going to do all of everything alike. What it means is I have aspirational goals for people, and I'm going to figure out a way to scaffold that for them so that everybody can have a chance to participate. It really means teaching up means two things: setting high ceilings of expectations so that excellence is really a goal for everybody, but also building high ladders of access so that kids from all kinds of backgrounds can work with those amazing ideas in ways that are appropriately challenging for them. You might want to take a look at this slide and then I'll sign off with you here. But the idea of scaffolding work, there are an infinite number of things that you and I can do in a classroom to help kids reach higher than they think they can reach. And these are just a few things that we're not going to do with everybody, but that would be scaffolding that I could use with a particular kind of student. And the idea is that if we taught all kids as though they were smart and supported them as though they were smart, they would become a lot smarter. And we have evidence of that is voluminous when people work with this. And I think maybe what I'll do now is, just because I do need to move forward with you, I'm going to share, I hope, here, a letter that one teacher wrote to me, and we'll use this as kind of a goodbye thing. And I can't see my screen too well here, so I'm going to have to punt. But she says, I went to a conference in early December where people were talking about teaching up. And on the plane on the way home, I thought to myself, what if I tried to teach up with my class? What do I give kids messages that I think some of them are smart, but not the rest of them? Do I do things with my class that scaffold success for kids who aren't accustomed to having it? So she said, when I went home, I began working with my kids to talk about why challenge is really important. and how we could work together as a class to help everybody succeed with really challenging work, including helping one another and talking about where success comes from. Once they'd finished that conversation or were into it and had it going on for a while, she said my next step was to give everyone an advanced task with varied scaffolding starting in January. Last night's assignment was a character analysis, looking at how characters changed over time, proving their assertions in multiple ways, and determining the origin of the change. And then I held my breath. She's a fourth grade teacher, so don't assume she's teaching high school seniors. This is a fourth grade excellent assignment she'd given them. So I asked them to do those things, and then I held my breath. This morning, I saw a new level of effort and understanding from all of my students. We went over some growth opportunities, but all in all, it was a major success. My students are super motivated to live up to the challenge, looking forward to the next teaching up assignment. So I hope that today's time together has given you some stretched ways to think about differentiation, some affirmation and some challenge, has helped you think a little bit about a differentiation state of mind and which aspects of that you're already working on and what another next step might be. And also just to think really generally about what it would mean to teach your class as if everybody were super smart, and what you could do to scaffold their success on their own, but also the way you teach and the way they collaborate, which can help them rise to new levels as well. So thank you very much, Georgia, for the opportunity to be with the group today, and to all of you for coming and hanging with me in spite of my rapid Southern accent. I hope you've picked up a few things that were useful.
We picked up a lot of things. I would like to ask you if you have a couple of moments to share with us. So maybe we can answer one or two questions that were written on the chat. I don't know if you can. So I have to ask.
Yes, I can stay. I'm fine. I could stay.
Okay, so the colleagues that have collected the questions, just a couple of questions from the chat.
Okay. Are you going to share them with me, or should I find them?
They are going to ask the questions, I think, orally, right?
I think Mary will be asking.
All right. Thank you so much, Mrs. Tomlinson, for your contribution to the development of the teachers of English in Greece. We have tried to group the questions, a few questions in terms of their theme. So one of the questions submitted has to do with groupings. The most effective way a teacher says to differentiate the teaching is grouping. How can she convince the students that strongly deny to participate in groups? And if the students agree to participate in groups, would it be better for teachers to form groups with students of different proficiency levels so that stronger students can assist the weaker ones? Or should there be some other kind of grouping, in your opinion?
That's a great question. And again, I think for me, at least, something that unfolded in my thinking over a period of time. I didn't go into class one day and say, oh, I could do 6 different things today. It was a step-by-step process. But flexible grouping is a really key concept in differentiation. And what that means is we have pretty good general evidence that if students work with a variety of their peers in a variety of ways, they get more learning, they get more of a sense of community, they have more opportunity to contribute to groups. And so sometimes I might want to put kids in groups that have a similar interest related to something that we're talking about. If we're talking about something in social studies or geography, some of the kids might want to investigate how this thing works in a country in Europe other than Greece. Somebody might prefer looking at how it works in a big city because they've only lived in a small town. In other words, if I can put them in groups by what they're interested in, would you rather do research on giraffes or toad frogs? I'm being kind of silly there, but just their interests are alike. Sometimes I might want to put kids with different interests in a group so that they hear one student talking about how this thing works in this context and another one talking about how it works in that context. Sometimes I might want to have random grouping. I'm going to use a randomizer, which some teachers do in their classrooms, as sort of a spinner. And I've just recently saw a teacher who has taped a playing card, aces and clubs and hearts, on the table where every kid sits. Every kid has a playing card taped to the desk where they sit. And she spins the spinner and says, okay, at your desk this time, the students who have the hearts will be the ones that respond. So they respond in different ways with the spinner. Or she might put groups of 4 together who are all spades and then 4 together who are clubs working. So it's really random. Sometimes she might say to students, pick one student that you really want to work with on this because you think working with that student would be helpful to you. And that sometimes may take a little time to define what helpful is and what's working and isn't and what working means. But pick one student that you want to work with. And then I'm going to assign 2 others to the group to work with you. Flexible grouping means using sometimes groups based on readiness, sometimes on interest, sometimes on learning preferences. And then within that, groups that are homogeneous based on readiness or interest or learning preferences. And then sometimes groups that are heterogeneous based on readiness or interest or learning preferences. And sometimes groups that I choose, and sometimes groups that kids choose. That sense that I'm not a certain kind of kid. I don't feel like I'm a loser because every time my math teacher works with a group, I'm in the same group of kids and none of us know what's going on, so I must be kind of stupid. Or every time X happens, the smart kids go over here and they work together and I'm never a smart kid. You're trying to keep from pigeonholing kids and keep from lowering their standards of expectation for themselves. But truly, one of the real advantages of a diverse classroom is that kids do hear different explanations, they do hear different perspectives, and they do learn to respect what kids can bring to a group if we're teaching them how to use a group well. So flexible grouping is the answer for me. In terms of the kid who does not want to work in a group, I would try to build in times where I say, okay, here is what you need to be doing. If you would rather work with a partner, find your partner and come sit in this side of the classroom. If you'd rather work by yourself, then find a place over here and work, so that sometimes they're not really glued to one another. They don't have to do everything alike. But I would want to keep trying to encourage them to work in groups and keep trying to teach them how to do that successfully. Probably it's the case that the kids who are resistant to it are afraid of it in some way or other. Either the assignments are not challenging enough, so it's boring and they feel like they're misplaced, or they don't know what the kids are talking about and it's too much. So really trying to do grouping that's attentive to where kids are, but without pigeonholing them, and using as many kinds of groups as you can, I think is important. Sorry to be so long on that, but that is a really important question that many people have.
Thank you so much. Christina?
Yeah, well, thank you for the wonderful things you told us, Dr. Tomlinson. I think you made a really inspirational environment of WebEx, which is, quite a rare experience. So the question I'd like to ask is, one of our colleagues suggested that, as you also, I think, indicated in a way, that differentiated instruction involves developing students' critical thinking. And that in the sense that when you do things that are relevant to students' needs, inevitably students learn why they're doing things rather than just, what they're doing. Well, any comment on this?
I think I kind of thought you were going one direction, you went another direction. Can you say that again for me? Let me see if I can paraphrase it. Is it that you're asking if work is relevant to kids, they get better at critical thinking? Is that what you're saying?
Differentiated instruction involves doing things that are relevant to students' needs. So this helps them develop their critical thinking, which involves discovering the why of things rather than just the what.
That second thing you said is really powerful too. It's easy for us to get hooked on they have to know 1,000 what answers, and we don't get into the why answers or the how answers, and that's where the thinking happens. But yes, I think that's a very important point. If you're asking me to work with something that I really relate to, it's an issue that's important to me, or it relates to my life, or it's part of a dream that I have, I'm going to be a much better thinker than if you're asking me to think of, always protect kids from all of that. But a great deal of power comes from, that's what the engagement piece means, talking about curriculum that's engaging, stuff that connects with kids, that helps them connect what we're learning with their lives, that helps them see beyond the classroom to how these ideas play out and how they have use. Yeah, I think that's a very powerful approach that question addresses.
May I also ask a question myself? It was about, you raised a point about tolerating ambiguity. And I thought this was wonderful, but could you explain a bit further, make it a bit more tangible?
Yes. Tolerating ambiguity is one of the leading characteristics of a creative and productive person. And I think sometimes a great way to make a point on that is to help kids learn about people that themselves, adults that they will know in the real world who tolerated ambiguity. In the U.S., I'll think of different people than you would in Greece, but Michael Jackson, no, not Michael Jackson, I'll forget. I'm not going to try even the name now. I know it as well as I know mine, but give that up. A basketball player that's Michael Jordan, one of the best that's existed in this country ever. And he writes about the fact that he practiced for hundreds of hours, thousands of hours before he got anything like as good as he was. And in the beginning didn't even look all that promising. I could tell them stories about people who sent in manuscripts to 25, 30 publishers and got turned down by all of them and started all over again and sent them in some more, and it didn't work the second time. An actress like Meryl Streep, who was told that she was not attractive enough or smart enough to play any roles in the film she was auditioning for. And she was hurt, but then she got on the subway and thought, that's not me, that man's kind of stupid, I'm going to go back and try again. The world is full of successful people who were unsuccessful until they became successful. And so what that means is one of the prime ones in this country is a story that's told about Thomas Edison, which is probably true, where one of his lab assistants said, you must be discouraged because we've done, I think it was something like 317 experiments that didn't work. And he said, oh, that's no problem. I'm not discouraged. Now we know 317 things that don't work. That's a very different kind of mindset. My paper is not perfect in the beginning. Well, this teacher's dumb and I'm not going to do anything about that, versus, well, show me how to get better and I'll, by George, get better with you here. So that's what you're trying to say, is that easy success doesn't exist. And that if you want to accomplish something, you need to be able to hang in there for the long haul. And so that what that means is I did the best I knew today and I still don't get this math, but that's okay. There are other ways I can come at it, and I will do that and I will get there. I used to give my 8th graders sometimes an assignment which they both hated and loved, but that was to go home and have a new idea about what we'd been talking about, an idea that they had never had before and that they were pretty sure no other student in their class would have had, and just come back with that statement the next day. And I think they spent more time thinking about that than they ever did anything where they were supposed to be learning right answers. And how do you have a new thought? Where does a new thought come from? Where do you start? How will I know if it's new? But those are things that help kids kind of hang on. Another thing that helped me with this, with working with older students, but I've had colleagues who worked with younger ones that did very similar things. Tried to teach them the difference between convergent thinking and divergent thinking. In convergent thinking, we're trying to get the right answer, so we should all get the same answer. In divergent thinking, we're trying to do things differently than other people, and we should come back with many different ways of looking at this. And what I found, of course, that some of my students were convergently focused and some were divergently focused, and both of the groups hated having to do the other thing. But if you're a divergent thinker and you don't get any of the convergence, you don't have the information you need to go anywhere. And if you're a convergent thinker and won't take a risk to think divergently, then you're never going to go too far either. So having assignments that called for both of those traits for me was a way to help ambiguity pop up for us.
Great, thank you very much.
Well, I think we have to close. It's time, unfortunately. Dear Mrs. Tomlinson, dear Carol, let us express our gratitude to you for accepting to accompany us today. There are many, many warm wishes and enthusiastic comments in the chat, I have to tell you. Physically, we may be 1,000 miles away, but I think you have managed to touch our emotions with your thoughts, with your ideas. Hopefully, today's meeting will be a call to action, a challenge to apply the knowledge, the ideas in our classrooms, because we shouldn't forget that the journey of learning is infinite and the recipients of our actions are our students. Well, thank you very much. Well, I think a thank you is not enough. Until we meet again, hopefully.
That would be great.
I wish you all a wonderful evening, a wonderful weekend. I think it's lunchtime in the US, so you should enjoy your lunch now. Thank you very much.
That's okay. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the
thanks enormously.
All of you had to be with me and to listen, even though I couldn't see you. But I appreciate the fact that every time I have worked with folks in Greece, the group has been eager to learn and thoughtful and willing to put up with the way I sound. So thank you very much for that and for the opportunity to think along with you today.
We thank you. We thank you.
Thank you.
We thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Words are not enough to express our thankfulness. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ όλες εσάς που παρακολουθήσατε.
Μπράβο.
Πιστεύουμε ότι σας έχετε κλείσει αυτό το 2ωρο με πολλή πληροφορία, με πολλή έμπνευση. Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω εκ μέρους των συναδέλφων συμβούλων τη Γεωργία Δελμπανίδου. Χωρίς τη συμβολή της δεν θα είχαμε αυτή την ευκαιρία να ακούσουμε αυτά τα υπέροχα πράγματα. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, Γεωργία. Και βέβαια πρέπει να ευχαριστήσουμε και την Ευαγγελία Καραγιάννη για την τεχνική υποστήριξη με το live streaming, γιατί επίσης χωρίς την Ευαγγελία Καραγιάννη δεν θα μπορούσατε και εσείς που παρακολουθήσατε, τόσο και οι συνάδελφοι που δεν μπόρεσαν να συνδεθούν, να έχουν ευκαιρία να το παρακολουθήσουν στο κανάλι μας από το YouTube. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ όλους. Καλό Σαββατοκύριακο και να είστε καλά.
Και εσένα, Δέσποινα, που μας φιλοξένησες.
Σε όλους και όλες.
Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε. Καλό βράδυ.
Καλό βράδυ.
Καλό βράδυ.
Καλό βράδυ.
Καλό βράδυ.
Καλό βράδυ.
Καλό Σαββατοκύριακο.
Καλό Σαββατοκύριακο σε όλους.
Καλό βράδυ.